I think I'm in frame and in focus. Click the links to support my vitally important work or to send me your Comicsgate project to be edited. Those are always a lot of fun. How dirty is mainstream comics? Yes, they are. They are all the dirt. They are all the filth. CBR was retweeting this, I don't know if you're on Twitter or not, the voting link for the comic awards the other day, and people voted for EVS because he's got a big following and he's legitimately a good artist. That's basically what the awards are. Mostly a popularity contest. That's what they are. That's fine. Those are staying within the rules of the game. So what do? They suspend the vote to prevent your human sunbeam, Mr. Frogman, from winning. The people wanted him to win, and so they can't have that. So, no. Ethan could get 90% of the vote, and he wouldn't have won. You're never going to get a fair deal. All animals are equal, but some are definitely more equal. If you look at the Hugo Award winners over the years, this is from 2013. You'll notice the disappearance of the men, and let's go to 2018, I think, and they are slowly replaced with women, which is odd because men are better writers. When you have an award stage that is 90% women, then 10 years ago it was 90% men, you know that there are machinations afoot. And yes, I'm qualified to speak on sci-fi and fantasy because I've been reading it for decades. Men in that genre are much, much better writers. Politics are downstream from culture. Woke books, comics, films, shows, and woke award shows are a way of controlling the narrative. There was a time when an award actually meant something, that you were going to get a decent product that had probably won on merit. And just for giggles, I downloaded some of the Hugo nominees' books, and what did you expect? They were bad from page one. In no shape or form should the ones I have read been nominated for anything. Then you look at the winners, and you've got blue, red, green, purple hair, women dressed like men, men dressed like women, soylent smiles all around. It was obviously a far left-wing crowd. Sci-fi used to be bought and written by men. The male writers, they knew how to sell to their audience because the difference in male and female writers was the male writers of a few decades ago, well, he was the primary breadwinner. He had to sell his books or he'd have to go to work in advertising. The people writing now are in a different scenario. Not to put too fine a point on it, they're childish, weirdo cat ladies. Even the men who dress like women, hey, no judgments from me, but my point is that they are not having kids that they have to support, or for the women who aren't cat moms, they're married to someone who is selling insurance while they dabble as dilettantes in writing silly stories. Writing is more of a hobby for them, and it shows. I guess a lot of these books are for the online market, but the covers look like they designed them at home using freeware from 20 years ago. They don't look at all professional. And then I opened to page one and I started reading. Those first few paragraphs are critical, assuming that you're doing this for a job and not just as a hobby. I downloaded a bunch, I read a few pages of each, and they were garbage. Pretentious amateur attempts. Because they don't need to sell the books. They just have to earn enough to pay rent and buy weed or have their husbands support them. SJWs are parasites who see an industry that is mostly a bunch of dudes having fun. They see that pleasure and it bothers them because they don't understand how people can simply have a nice time without backbiting or undercutting. They see guys who've got a board game club in churches. It spreads to other churches, then it gets an online footprint and is on social media. SJWs see that and they get enraged. Guys who don't hate themselves, they probably aren't even feminists. They see this church board game club and they say, well, where's the diversity? Where's the women? You guys should reach out to include women who play board games. But they really shouldn't. They have a good thing that works. It's fine just being left alone. Once SJWs decide something needs diversity, they are trying to control and ruin it. And the punchline is, these SJWs don't even play the games. They want to co-opt and destroy a group that they aren't involved in or interested in because they aren't having fun and they want to make sure that nobody else is either. SJWs complain about Comicsgate as well, which is weird because they're not involved in it. We are all involved in the comic industry in some degree, but Comicsgate is a subset of non-SJWs in comics. If you're involved in comics, you don't have to be involved in Comicsgate if you don't want to be. There's no reason to give a rat's ass about Comicsgate. But the people of Soy hate it because they don't control it, and it upsets the narrative. They control 99% of comics, but it drives them crazy that they don't get to control that last 1% that's Comicsgate. They can't just leave us alone to enjoy Jawbreakers, Lonestar, and Black and White in peace. SJWs control DC, Marvel, Image, Dark Knight, and the rest, but they want Comicsgate also. Because politics is downstream from culture. That's why they're desperate to control social media, which they do, but then alt social media pops up, and you got Parlour, Telegram, Gab, Bitchute, DLive, 4chan, and the various websites where people are free to express themselves. I saw a video on Twitter where third world people put a heavy tire around a victim and burned him alive. It's a practice for witchcraft. They also believe that struggle-snuggling children will cure AIDS and that bald men's heads might contain gold and albinos must be killed. It's insane cruelty that boggles the mind. A crowd of people stood around and watched a victim burn to death. And that's bad enough, but people will try to share the videos in an attempt to bring awareness to the issue to hopefully do something about it. But mainstream social media won't let us share that information because it goes against the narrative of the peaceful refugee from the third world. Obviously, this brutality isn't representative of the entire third world, but it is relevant, important information. People deserve to be made aware of it, but we're not allowed to, which helps craft the narrative. Even Tim Pool brought up something similar when he was on Joe Rogan with the Twitter folk. He mentioned the using the pronouns issue. If you don't use them, Twitter will permanently ban you. So we're forced to use them, which shifts the narrative that society accepts it and everything it entails. What if it goes against your religious beliefs or your morals and ethics? You got no choice. Twitter is used by the President of the United States. There is no alternative platform. There's just Twitter. What if you don't have a Black Lives Matter graphic in your profile? Should you be legally allowed to be fired? Or what if you're pro-life or Christian? What if you have an All Lives Matter? Or heaven forbid, a White Lives Matter? Social media is pushing that to defend the notion that all lives matter is istophobic. And you can't defend it on social media or they'll just kick you off. Even to say that all lives matter is enough to get you fired and your spouse. Then they started firing girlfriends. Next, they'll start firing the people who follow you on social media. 1984 took a little longer than we expected. As a society, where do we want to go? Do we want mob rule or a representative republic? You have a city of 1 million people, but 200 people in a mob decide to start tearing down statues. And statues, not statutes. And let's be honest, most of the crowd is low IQ, mentally ill, or on drugs. Okay, first the Confederate statues are gone. Fair enough. But that quickly switched to all statues of European people, even ones who fought against slavery, because the BLM, Antifa, they don't know their history. And to be fair, many of them can read, but they're not very good at it. That's why they use so many emojis. They have already started book burning, digitally at least. Amazon, with other retailers, won't sell an ever-increasing list of books. Teachers aren't allowed to teach from certain textbooks because the author is a male of European descent. I call this the Oprah Winfrey literature plan. The best writers have stood the test of time. Some works are thousands of years old. So up until about, 1970, 1980, writers were focusing on stuff like Shakespeare, Herman Melville, Samuel Clemens, and people who had some time to percolate under review and study. So people studied from the masters, and their own writing had a chance of being pretty good, and maybe in 100 years, their own stuff would be studied by scholars. Then about 40 years ago, the woke academia, decided to start studying less of the classics. I have a science degree, so I don't write well. And more modern writers from the second and third world. Writers who have not stood the test of time. Writers who were picked based on their skin color. Writers not chosen on merit, but on political ideology. This has contributed to the dumbing down of writers, which leads to garbage storylines. A lot of this is because the college professors aren't themselves of European origin. They feel no loyalty to it, and some of them actively hate it and are very, very racist. But they're commies. They're hardcore communists. Their goal is to proselytize, I should have just said preach, and make propaganda, not to create good writers. You get developmentally disabled people like Oprah Winfrey pushing black writers who may or may not be excellent. I'm not saying they're not, but they haven't stood the test of time. And statistics show that most writers won't stand time's brutal scrutiny. Emily Dickinson holds up. Maya Angelou probably won't. College undergraduate classes only have so much time. You could study only the greats for 4 years and still barely scratch the surface. The time to study Guatemalan lesbians is for your PhD, because otherwise you get writers who write according to the Oprah Winfrey writing plan. Which brings us back to the Hugo winners and modern comic books and why they suck so badly. Both of those categories, those writers are picked for ideology or skin color, not talent. If you're brown and woke and can sign your name, you can write comics or win a Hugo. The entire dynamic has shifted from people with talent who want to get married and have kids, support their family, to single, childless women or women whose husbands support them. They're not writing to make money. They're just enjoying a hobby, and the product shows. It totally sucks. You got people in their 20s and 30s who can't write greatness because they've never read great works. Huckleberry Finn and Lord of the Rings are haram now. They're both excellent stories that one should study. Even Harry Potter is in hot water because their author had the audacity to state that women are women. She'd been getting death threats by mentally ill cat people on Twitter. If you live in America, shouldn't you study American greats and the Europeans who inspired them? You can't beat Western literature. It's the best in the world because they've been doing it for a long time. Even the lighter stuff like Henry Rider Haggard, H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, and author Conan Doyle is amazing. Are amazing. I admit that I have read some good international stuff, but The Good Earth wouldn't be politically correct today because you got the Chinese grandmother or grandfather sleeping with his granddaughter. And even if you are an alt-left writer like Chuck Wendig, if you have the wrong skin color, there is no protection when the mob decides to come for you. That's why communists constantly virtue signal to make sure that they stay in the center of the herd. But even if you're a communist, if you're a straight dude with fair skin, you are on the outermost circle of the herd. It's only a matter of time until you are somebody's bitch. But even if Chuck Wendig gets canceled, he's not going to take the red pill. He'll just assume it's a bunch of Twitter assholes who misunderstood him. Guys like him are usually not going to change. He'll just think that the mob has gone too far in his particular witch trial. But all other witch trials are perfectly valid. You know, except unless they're one of his friends, then the mob made a mistake. The way to bypass all that subjective lynch mobs and witch trials is through the due process. You know, notice an opportunity to be heard, cross-examination, right to confront your witness, have a fair advocate defend you, that kind of stuff. It just boils down to being fair. Do you want to go back to witch trials and lynchings? Do you want the mob, a small mob, ruling the majority? Apparently they do, at least in Portland and Seattle, and actually a lot of states, because you've got a small angry mob making the decisions for millions of people. If you want to tear down a statue, you simply put it to a vote. And they have been put to votes before, and the people who lived in those states didn't want those statues torn down. The angry mob decides they can use violence. Well, that means violence is on the table. Violence has always been on the table. Because the Constitution is just a piece of paper. A country is its people. If you don't have good people, you're not going to have a good country. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, guys. I will see you all next episode.